Well, greetings everybody. Here is a question from MyMathLab about the empirical rule, and it goes like this. So we have a sample of farms, and our sample consists of the value of the land and buildings on the farm, okay? Roughly, that's basically what's going on. So we know that the mean value of the farms is $1,700. And so that tells us where like the center of the data is, roughly. Some farms are worth more than that, some are worth less, but you know, the middle of all those values is about 1,700. Standard deviation is 200. And so the standard deviation roughly tells us how spread out the data is. Like so you might imagine, the different farms have different values and the numbers might be spread out all over the place, and the standard deviation is a rough measure of the spread of the data. Okay. Now, here's what specifically we're being asked. We're being asked to use the empirical rule to estimate of all those farms in the sample, how many of them have a value between $1,300 and $2,100. Okay. Now, before we decide to answer that, let's talk about what the empirical rule is. The empirical rule is for bell-shaped data, and there is something about that in the question. It says the data does have a bell-shaped distribution. Okay, so the empirical rule is appropriate for this one. And it tells us this. It says that 68% of the data will be within one standard deviation of the mean. 95% will be within two standard deviations of the mean. And 99% will be within three standard deviations of the mean. Because remember, the mean is roughly the middle, and the numbers might be all spread out around the mean, but nonetheless, I can tell you how many are within 1, 2, or 3 standard deviations of the mean. And this is all in terms of estimation. Like the empirical rule would say it about 68%, about 95%, about 99.7%. Okay, now let's see how we can apply this. I know that the mean is 1,700 and the standard deviation is 200. So first, like, what does it look like to be one standard deviation of the mean or two standard deviations of the mean, and so on? So I have a number line here and I put the mean right there, 1,700. Here's what one standard deviation from the mean looks like. I'll go, well, what's the standard deviation? 200, right? Okay, standard deviation is 200. So what if I'm at 1,700, which is where the mean is, and I go up 200? That's 1,900. And what if I go down 200? That's 1,500. So the range 1,500 to 1,900 is one standard deviation from the mean. Now, did the question ask me about that range of values? Did it say how many farms are 1,500 to 1,900? No, it said 1,300 to 2,100. So let's go and see what two standard deviations of the mean looks like. To get that, I go another standard deviation up and another standard deviation down. Okay, so if the standard deviation is 200, what's it look like if from here I go another 200 up? That give me 1,900 plus 200 is 2,100. And what if I go another standard deviation down? 1,500 minus 200 is 1,300. So this range here, 1,300 to 2,100, is two standard deviations from the mean. Now, if I need to go 3, I can just repeat that process, and I can go up another standard deviation and down another one. But I notice the range 1,300 to 2,100 is the one that I was asked about. Okay, so what they're asking about is how many farms in the sample have a value between 1,300 and 2,100. Well, that's two standard deviations from the mean. So 95% of the farms in the sample have a value in that range. Okay, so for part A, I need to calculate 95% of the data, however much data there was. There were 72 farms total, so 95% of 72 will be my answer. 95% of 72 is 0.95 times 72, which is 68.4. Okay, it did say to round to the nearest whole number, and 68.4 rounds to 68. So 68 farms out of the entire sample of 72 have a value somewhere between 1,300 and 2,100. Part B says, well, what if there were 25 more farms in the sample with the same mean and standard deviation? How many of those farms would be in this range of values? Well, you know, that range of values, 13 to 2,100, that's still 2 standard deviations. So it's still 95%. So if you add 25 more farms, 95% of those 25 are still going to be within the range that I was given. 95% of 25 is 0.95 times 25. That's 23.75. And rounding that to the nearest whole number, like it says, gives me 24.